I'm a 27-year-old woman who thought she had it all figured out when it came to love and relationships. For 2 years, I was in what I believed to be a dream relationship with Eric, a 29-year-old man who seemed like everything I could ever want. He was charming, attentive, and always talked about our future together. From the very beginning, it felt like we were building something solid. Eric wasn't just a boyfriend, he made me feel like we were a team. He constantly brought up plans for our future, getting married, buying a house, starting a family. His enthusiasm made it easy to trust him. 6 months ago, we decided to take a big step. I moved into his apartment. He insisted it made financial sense and symbolized how committed we were to each other. I agreed, thinking it was the natural progression of our relationship. Living together started off great. We split the bills for rent and groceries evenly, but Eric handled the larger savings account we were building for our future home. I didn't question it at the time. He had always seemed responsible with money. I thought we were planning for a life together, so it only made sense to let him take charge. He even introduced me to his family early on in the relationship, and they were incredibly welcoming. His mom was especially sweet, always talking about how she hoped I'd be part of the family one day. Looking back, it felt like I had their approval, and that only deepened my trust in him. But over the last few months, things began to shift. Eric started pulling away. Date nights became rare, and he seemed distracted even when we spent time together. When I tried to talk about the future, he'd brush it off or change the subject. I told myself he might be stressed about work or something he didn't feel ready to share. Then came the fight. It wasn't even over anything serious, just a misplaced laundry basket. Eric exploded, snapping at me in a way that felt completely out of character. I was stunned. He stormed out of the apartment and didn't come back for hours. After that, things only got worse. For the next few weeks, Eric was distant, cold, and avoidant. He'd barely talk to me, and when he did, it was short and dismissive. I felt like I was living with a stranger. I kept wondering what I had done wrong, but every attempt to get him to open up was met with silence. Then, one night, everything fell apart. Eric came home and told me, out of nowhere, that he was ending our relationship. He didn't give me a real reason, just some vague line about needing space. I was blindsided. This was the man who had spent 2 years talking about forever with me. Now he was throwing it all away without so much as an explanation. I begged him to tell me what had happened, to at least give me some clarity. He refused, saying it wasn't about me and that he had made up his mind. What made it worse was how cold he was, like he'd already moved on in his head. He then dropped another bomb. I had a week to move out of his apartment. I had nowhere to go, no backup plan, and no family nearby to help. I felt completely unmoored. The next morning, I woke up to find that Eric had packed his things and left. No note, no goodbye, just an empty closet and silence. I was left scrambling to figure out where to live, all while trying to process the heartbreak. A few days later, I learned the truth from a mutual friend. Eric had been seeing someone else, his coworker, Stephanie, for months. Apparently, their relationship had been going on long before he started acting distant. But that wasn't all. When I tried to access the shared savings account Eric had managed, I discovered it had been emptied. Everything we had set aside for our future was gone. He hadn't just betrayed me emotionally, he had financially wiped me out too. I didn't know how to begin piecing my life back together. Losing Eric hurt, but the betrayal stung even more. I had trusted him with everything, my heart, my home, and my finances, and he had left me with nothing. But one thing was clear, I wasn't going to let him walk away from this unscathed. I decided to fight back, to take control of my life again. If Eric thought he could betray me and move on without consequences, he was about to learn he was very, very wrong. Update 1. When Eric vanished, I was left scrambling, not just for a new place to live, but for answers. My best friend Clara was my rock through those chaotic first few days. She showed up with coffee and a suitcase full of spare blankets when I needed them most. As I unpacked what little I had in the guest room of her apartment, we started piecing things together. My first instinct was to reach out to Eric. I didn't want to fight or beg, I just wanted closure. But every text I sent was either ignored or met with short, dismissive responses. Calls went straight to voicemail. It was like I had been erased from his life overnight. Clara suggested letting it go, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't adding up. That's when the pieces started falling into place. A mutual friend who had stayed silent during the breakup finally reached out. They confirmed that Eric had been seeing Stephanie, a coworker I'd met once or twice, for at least 4 months. It wasn't a fling or something that started after we ended. He had been cheating on me for nearly half our relationship. I didn't want to believe it, but then Clara showed me something on her phone. Eric and Stephanie had gone public on social media. There were pictures of them at a beachside resort, captioned with things like "perfect getaway with my love." The dates matched up uncomfortably well with the missing money from our home fund. I knew I had to act, but I didn't know where to start. Clara suggested speaking to a lawyer to see if I had any chance of recovering the money Eric had drained from the account. The consultation was sobering. Since everything was in his name and we weren't married, the lawyer explained that pursuing legal action would be expensive and likely fruitless. Still, they advised me to document everything in case something came up later. The next step was cleaning house. I went through my social media and deleted every trace of Eric, every photo, every tagged post, every gushy caption about how lucky I was to have him. As I did, nosy acquaintances began flooding my inbox with questions. Some were genuinely concerned, others seemed more interested in the drama. One message, in particular, hit hard. Eric's mother, who had once told me she couldn't wait for me to join the family, sent a brief, cold text. She said she was sorry for what had happened, but that she didn't want to get involved because it was too complicated. It felt like another door slamming shut. Clara kept reminding me to focus on the facts, not the emotions, so I started digging. I went through old emails and text messages, looking for anything that might be useful. That's when I stumbled upon an email from Eric, written months ago, where he detailed how we'd manage our shared savings. It was clear in his words that I had contributed just as much as he had, even if the account was in his name. Armed with that email, I considered my next move. Part of me wanted to let Stephanie know what kind of man she was with. Another part of me wondered if it was worth the energy. I turned to the internet for advice, posting anonymously on a relationship forum. The responses were overwhelming. Most people encouraged me to reach out to Stephanie, not out of revenge, but because she deserved to know the truth. The decision was almost made for me when I bumped into Eric and Stephanie at a coffee shop near Clara's apartment. They were sitting by the window, laughing and acting like nothing was wrong. Eric froze when he saw me. Instead of acknowledging me, he turned back to Stephanie, whispering something in her ear. She glanced at me, her smile faltering for a split second before she looked away. That encounter solidified my resolve. Stephanie's reaction wasn't just awkward, it was suspicious, like she didn't know the full story. Clara and I spent the rest of the day crafting a message. It wasn't emotional or accusatory, just a clear, factual account of what had happened, complete with screenshots of texts and that email about the savings. I hesitated before hitting send. What if she didn't believe me? What if it made things worse? Clara reminded me that the truth was the truth, and what Stephanie did with it was up to her. So I sent it. The wait for a reply was nerve-wracking. When Stephanie finally responded, her tone was defensive. She accused me of trying to ruin her relationship and claimed Eric had already told her everything. But I noticed something in her words, a hint of doubt. I replied with more proof and left it at that. For a while, there was radio silence. Then I noticed Stephanie's social media posts becoming cryptic, vague quotes about trust and betrayal, photos with friends but none with Eric. It seemed like the seeds of doubt had been planted. I didn't know where this would go, but one thing was clear, Eric's perfect facade was starting to crack, and I wasn't about to let him sweep everything under the rug. This was just the beginning. Update 2. After sending the initial message to Stephanie, I didn't expect much. Clara reassured me I had done my part by sharing the truth, but a small part of me wondered if Stephanie would even read it. She seemed defensive during our coffee shop encounter, and I could tell Eric had already spun his version of the story. When Stephanie replied, her tone was sharp and defensive. She accused me of trying to sabotage her relationship and claimed Eric had already explained everything. She even implied I was bitter and jealous of their happiness. It was frustrating, but I didn't let it stop me. I sent her proof. Screenshots of texts, the email about the savings account, and even a timeline of events. I made it clear I wasn't trying to interfere with her life. I just wanted her to know the truth about the person she was with. After that, there was nothing but silence. A few days later, Eric's name popped up on my phone. His message was a mix of rage and condescension. He accused me of being petty and desperate to ruin his happiness. He claimed I was making up lies because I couldn't handle him moving on. I didn't reply. Clara reminded me that engaging with him would only escalate things. Around this time, Stephanie's social media started to shift. She began posting cryptic quotes about trust and betrayal. There were fewer pictures of her and Eric, and the comments on her posts became noticeably different. Some friends were asking if everything was okay, others were leaving vague words of encouragement. Then the messages started rolling in, from mutual friends, people I hadn't spoken to in weeks. They wanted to know what had happened, and when I told them, many expressed shock. A few admitted they had doubted me at first, but now believed my side of the story. It was validating to know people were finally seeing the truth. But not everyone was supportive. Some of Eric's friends accused me of being vindictive, saying I should move on and stop dragging him down. They painted me as a bitter ex who couldn't accept the breakup. It stung, but I focused on the people who stood by me. Meanwhile, finding a new place to live was proving harder than I'd anticipated. Between moving costs and the money Eric had stolen, I was barely scraping by. I kicked myself for trusting him so blindly, but there wasn't much I could do, except push forward. A week after my initial message, Stephanie reached out again. This time, her tone was different. She admitted she had been questioning Eric but needed more proof before confronting him. It was exhausting to relive everything, but I decided to help. I sent her additional screenshots and explained how Eric had manipulated me financially. The fallout was swift. Stephanie stopped posting pictures of Eric altogether. Mutual friends began sharing updates. Apparently, she had confronted him about the savings account and the timeline of their relationship. Eric, true to form, tried to spin the narrative, blaming me for planting doubts in her mind. But Stephanie wasn't buying it. The final straw came when Stephanie discovered proof of Eric's lies on her own. I don't know what she found, but it was enough for her to end things. She blocked him on social media and started posting pictures with friends, alluding to a fresh start. Eric didn't take it well. Another message from him popped up on my phone, full of anger and self-pity. He accused me of ruining his relationship and destroying his reputation. This time, I didn't even open the message, I just deleted it. Mutual friends confirmed that Stephanie had dumped him, citing his dishonesty and financial manipulation. Some even apologized to me, admitting they should have believed me from the start. It felt like a small victory. Eric, on the other hand, was spiraling. Friends who had sided with him began distancing themselves after learning the full story. Stephanie's posts subtly shaded him, and word spread quickly about his actions. He tried to salvage his reputation, but the damage was done. As for me, I felt a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. Stephanie had seen the truth, and Eric's carefully crafted image was crumbling. I wasn't out for revenge, but it was satisfying to know he wouldn't be able to hurt anyone else the way he hurt me. Still, I knew I had a long way to go. My finances were in shambles, and the emotional toll of everything was heavier than I'd expected. Therapy became a lifeline, helping me process the betrayal and start rebuilding my life. This wasn't over, but for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was regaining control. Eric had underestimated me, and that was his biggest mistake. Update 3. Stephanie didn't stay quiet for long after breaking up with Eric. Within a week, mutual friends started reaching out, telling me she had been sharing her side of the story. She revealed how Eric lied about the timeline of their relationship, downplayed his financial manipulation, and tried to blame me for their problems. People were shocked, especially those who had doubted me before. Eric's reputation was taking a hit, and it didn't stop there. Stephanie had blocked him on all social media platforms, but her posts weren't subtle. She shared inspirational quotes about self-respect and cutting out toxic people, and her friends flooded the comments with support. The implications were clear to anyone who knew her. It wasn't long before word spread about the money Eric had taken from the savings fund. A friend of Stephanie's let slip that part of it had financed a luxury vacation she and Eric took just before our breakup. Knowing this made my blood boil, but it also solidified how careless and selfish he was. Eric, meanwhile, was scrambling to spin the narrative. He started telling people I was clingy and overly dramatic, trying to paint me as the bitter ex who couldn't let go. A few mutual friends reached out, clearly conflicted. Some wanted to stay neutral, but others apologized for ever believing his lies. Stephanie's willingness to share what she had gone through shifted the tide. Her circle of friends was larger and more vocal than Eric's, and people began pulling away from him. Even his family got involved. Eric's mother, who had once refused to engage with me after the breakup, called unexpectedly. She admitted she had suspected something was off when Eric ended things so abruptly. She said she hadn't wanted to interfere at the time but now felt guilty for staying silent. Hearing this felt like a small victory. As more people turned against Eric, he grew more desperate. He started messaging me again, this time accusing me of ruining his life. In one email, he demanded I stop dragging his name through the mud. I didn't engage right away, but after a few more messages, I responded. I calmly pointed out that the fallout he was experiencing wasn't due to anything I had done. It was the result of his own choices. After that, I blocked him. Through all this, therapy became a game changer for me. My therapist helped me see that Eric's actions weren't a reflection of my worth, but of his insecurities and selfishness. The more I processed everything, the less power his betrayal had over me. Stephanie reached out one last time. She thanked me for exposing the truth and apologized for doubting me initially. We weren't exactly friends, but there was a mutual understanding now. She seemed genuinely grateful to have escaped Eric's manipulation before things got worse. Not everyone handled the situation gracefully, though. One mutual friend who had tried to stay neutral decided to play mediator. They organized a small gathering and invited both Eric and me, hoping we'd reconcile. When I refused to attend, the friend decided to hear my side of the story in full detail. Afterward, they cut ties with Eric entirely. Eric's isolation grew as more people learned about his behavior. Attempts to date someone new were met with skepticism. Word travels fast in our social circles. One woman even reached out to Stephanie and me to confirm what she'd heard about him. Eric's charm wasn't enough to erase his tarnished reputation. For me, life was finally starting to stabilize. I secured a better living situation, leaned into my support network, and found myself thriving at work. The progress I made in therapy helped me focus on what truly mattered, my own growth and happiness. Looking back, I realized Eric's downfall wasn't something I orchestrated. His choices had set everything in motion. While it was satisfying to see him face the consequences, it wasn't my responsibility to fix him or shield him from the truth. This chapter of my life was closing, and for the first time in a long while, I felt ready to move forward. Update 4. Getting my own apartment felt like the biggest victory after everything with Eric. The place wasn't anything fancy, a cozy one-bedroom with old hardwood floors and a view of the parking lot, but it was mine. Moving in was chaotic, but Clara rallied a group of friends to help. By the end of the day, we were sitting on the floor with takeout, laughing about how I had accidentally packed my shoes in with my kitchen supplies. It was the first time I felt truly at peace in months. At work, things took a surprising turn. I had been pouring myself into my job as a way to stay busy, and it paid off when my boss called me in to offer a promotion. The raise was a game changer. It gave me the financial stability I desperately needed and the confidence boost I didn't know I was missing. I used part of my first paycheck to buy a bright yellow rug for the living room, something cheerful to Eric a fresh start. With the financial strain easing, I turned my focus to rebuilding my social life. During my relationship with Eric, I had let a lot of friendships drift. Now I was making an effort to reconnect. Lunches, coffee dates, game nights, it was like rediscovering pieces of myself I'd lost along the way. After some encouragement from Clara, I cautiously returned to social media. I didn't post much at first, just small updates about settling into my new place and spending time with friends. The response was overwhelmingly positive. People who had been on the periphery of my life were suddenly reaching out, offering support, or just catching up. One day, as I was scrolling through my notifications, a friend request popped up. It was Eric. I didn't think twice before hitting the block button. The nerve of him to even try reconnecting after everything he had done was almost laughable. Stephanie, meanwhile, seemed to be thriving. Through mutual friends, I heard she was dating someone new. Her posts hinted at a fresh start, with captions about leaving the past behind and finding happiness again. Every now and then, there'd be a subtle dig at Eric, like a picture with her new boyfriend tagged when you finally upgrade. Eric, on the other hand, was officially a social pariah. A mutual friend threw a party and didn't invite him, a deliberate choice everyone noticed. Apparently, Eric had tried to ask why and was met with a blunt response about his behavior. Despite the chaos Eric had left behind, I was starting to feel like my life was coming together. I consulted a lawyer again about the savings Eric had stolen, but after weighing the emotional toll against the likelihood of success, I decided to let it go. Therapy had taught me to pick my battles, and this one wasn't worth reopening old wounds. Speaking of therapy, I reached a milestone by graduating after several months of sessions. My therapist encouraged me to keep journaling and leaning on my support network, but she felt I was in a strong enough place to move forward on my own. To celebrate, I decided to take up painting. It started as a way to fill quiet evenings, but quickly became something more. There was something therapeutic about splashing colors onto a canvas with no rules or expectations. I even signed up for a community class, where I met people who shared the same enthusiasm for creating. As I grew more comfortable in my new life, I dipped my toes back into dating. I wasn't looking for anything serious, just testing the waters. The experience was eye-opening. I'd never been more aware of red flags, and for the first time I felt confident about setting boundaries. Eric, meanwhile, wasn't faring so well. A friend of a friend mentioned seeing him at a bar, drunk and ranting about how his life had fallen apart. It seemed like the consequences of his actions were finally catching up to him. Back in our shared social circles, Eric had become the punchline to a lot of jokes. References to his financial betrayal started popping up, and people were quick to call out his hypocrisy whenever he tried to justify his behavior. One quiet evening, I pulled out my journal and started reflecting on how far I'd come. I wrote about the whirlwind of emotions, the heartbreak, and the lessons I'd learned. Then, almost without thinking, I wrote a letter to my past self. In the letter, I forgave myself for trusting Eric. I acknowledged that I had acted out of love and hope, not weakness. More importantly, I promised to never lose sight of my own worth again. As I sealed the letter and tucked it away, I felt a wave of calm. My journey wasn't over, but I was finally in a place where I could look ahead without feeling weighed down by the past. Every small victory, a new hobby, a kind message from a friend, a sunny afternoon spent painting, felt like another step toward reclaiming my life. Update 5. Months after settling into my new life, I ran into Eric. I was at a coffee shop, waiting in line, when I noticed someone staring at me from a corner table. It took a second to register that it was him. He looked disheveled, messy hair, dark circles under his eyes, and an outfit that seemed thrown together. As I grabbed my coffee, he got up and walked over. He started to say something, but I didn't stick around to hear it. Without a word, I turned and walked out. I didn't need an apology, explanation, or closure. That chapter of my life was over, and I wasn't about to reopen it. A few days later, I received an email from him. It was long and filled with excuses. He took partial responsibility for what had happened, but mostly blamed circumstances and how things got complicated. I didn't even finish reading it. I clicked delete and moved on. By then, I had already started seeing someone new. It wasn't anything serious at first, just casual dates with someone who respected my boundaries and made me laugh. Over time, it grew into something more. He didn't make grand promises or try to sweep me off my feet. He just showed up consistently and treated me with kindness. It was refreshing and reminded me of what a healthy relationship should feel like. Stephanie, too, was thriving. Through mutual friends and social media, I learned she had landed a big promotion at work and was dating someone who seemed to adore her. Her posts were filled with travel photos and motivational captions about growth and resilience. It was clear she had left the chaos of Eric behind and was living her best life. Eric, on the other hand, was struggling. Rumors began circulating that he had lost his job. Poor performance and financial issues were apparently to blame, and he had burned too many bridges to find support. His once pristine image was now tarnished, and he seemed to be floundering both professionally and personally. As my life continued to improve, I decided to share my journey on social media. I wrote a post about overcoming betrayal and finding strength in the aftermath. I didn't name names or include specific details about Eric, but the message resonated. Comments poured in from friends and acquaintances who found my words inspiring. It felt empowering to turn my pain into something positive. Some of the people who had distanced themselves during the drama began reaching out. They apologized for not believing me sooner, or for staying silent when they should have spoken up. Slowly but surely, I rebuilt those connections, adding even more strength to my support network. Feeling a pull to give back, I started volunteering at a local shelter. It began as a way to fill time, but it quickly became a meaningful part of my routine. Helping others reminded me of how far I had come, and gave me a sense of purpose that extended beyond my own healing. One evening, I went through an old box of letters and mementos from my time with Eric. Love notes, movie ticket stubs, and photos, all reminders of what once was. Instead of holding on to them, I decided it was time to let go. I burned everything in a small ceremony of sorts, watching the flames erase the past. It felt like lifting a weight off my shoulders. My career was also thriving. My hard work was recognized in a company newsletter, featuring me as an example of resilience and dedication. It was a proud moment, and I celebrated by treating myself to a fancy dinner and a new outfit for work. Eric's final attempt to reach me came in the form of another message. This time, it was a short apology filled with regret and what sounded like genuine remorse. I didn't read beyond the first line. I had no reason to revisit that part of my life, so I deleted it without hesitation. Inspired by my journey, I decided to share my full story on Reddit. The response was overwhelming. People from all over shared their own experiences, offered support, and praised me for how I handled everything. It was a reminder that I wasn't alone and that my story could help others find their strength. With my past firmly behind me, I started planning a solo trip abroad. It felt like the perfect way to celebrate my independence and growth. A week in a new city, exploring, meeting people, and making memories on my own terms, it was exactly what I needed. As I packed for the trip, I took a moment to reflect on how far I'd come. What started as heartbreak and betrayal had turned into a journey of self-discovery and empowerment. I was no longer defined by what had happened to me. Instead, I was proud of how I had rebuilt my life, stronger and more confident than ever. This wasn't just the end of one chapter, it was the beginning of something new. I was ready for whatever came next, knowing that I had the strength to handle it.